In 1981, a United States Army colonel stood in front of a congressional subcommittee and said that the M2 Bradley fighting vehicle was a death trap. He said it was too expensive. He said it was too complicated. He said it had taken 13 years to develop a vehicle that still was not right. He said America had spent $1.5 billion producing something that was neither a good armored personnel carrier nor a good tank destroyer, and that it was worse than the vehicle it had replaced. Congress listened. Critics multiplied. The program was examined, investigated, and nearly cancelled 4 separate times. The Bradley survived all of it. In 2023, Ukrainian crews operating American-supplied Bradley fighting vehicles in eastern Ukraine were recording a kill ratio against Russian armor that nobody in the Pentagon had projected and nobody in Moscow had prepared for. Ukrainian Bradleys were destroying Russian tanks, not from ambush, not from prepared positions, in direct engagements, moving, shooting, moving again. The vehicle that a U.S. Army colonel had called a death trap in front of Congress was rewriting the rules of armored warfare in Europe. To understand the Bradley, you need to understand what America was trying to build and why it took so long to build it. In the late 1950s, the United States Army identified a fundamental problem with its armored doctrine. The M113 armored personnel carrier, the aluminum box on tracks that carried American infantry into battle, was doing exactly what it was designed to do: moving infantry to the battlefield, dropping them off, waiting. But Soviet doctrine had evolved. Soviet infantry fighting vehicles, the BMP-1 entering service in 1966, did not drop the infantry off. They kept the infantry inside. They fought from inside the vehicle. The BMP-1 73mm gun and Sagar anti-tank missile meant that a BMP-1 carrier could engage enemy armor directly while still protecting the infantry it carried. The M113 could not do that. American infantry dismounted. Soviet infantry fought mounted. If the armies met on a European battlefield, American soldiers would be running across open ground on foot, while Soviet soldiers were shooting at them from inside armored vehicles. The army needed a vehicle that could do what the BMP-1 did: fight from inside with a real gun against real armor. What emerged from 13 years of development, argument, redesign, cancellation threats, and congressional hearings was the M2 Bradley. The vehicle that entered U.S. Army service in 1981 was the result of a compromise between 3 different groups who wanted 3 different things. The infantry wanted a vehicle they could fight from inside, with ports that allowed them to fire their weapons while protected. They wanted the vehicle to carry as many soldiers as possible. They wanted it to be survivable against the weapons their Soviet counterparts carried. The armor community wanted a vehicle that could fight alongside tanks. They wanted a gun capable of killing Soviet infantry fighting vehicles. They wanted anti-tank missiles that could kill tanks from long range. The logistics community wanted something they could actually maintain in the field, with parts that were available and a system that did not require specialized technicians for every repair. The Bradley satisfied none of these groups completely and all of them partially. The final vehicle carried 7 infantry plus 3 crew. The infantry firing ports were fitted, but aerodynamic tests showed that they reduced vehicle speed, and their tactical utility was questioned from the beginning. The main armament was the 25mm M240 Bushmaster chain gun, the same weapon that would later be mounted on the Canadian LAV-3 and other vehicles. At 200 rounds per minute, with an effective range of 2,000 meters, it could destroy any Soviet infantry fighting vehicle and threaten the side armor of older Soviet tanks. The Tauji anti-tank missile system, mounted in a traversable launcher on the left side of the turret, gave the Bradley the ability to engage main battle tanks at ranges exceeding 3,750 meters, a distance at which the target could not effectively return fire. Armor protection was steel and aluminum composite, rated to defeat 14.5mm heavy machine gun fire across the frontal arc and 7.62mm across the sides. Against tank guns and heavy anti-tank missiles, it offered no protection at all. Combat weight was 27.6 tons. Top speed was 66 kilometers per hour on road. Range was 480 kilometers. The vehicle was expensive, approximately $3.2 million per unit in 1980s dollars. It was complicated. The fire control system, thermal imaging, laser rangefinder and ballistic computer were sophisticated enough to require extensive crew training. And it was controversial enough that critics called it a congressional pork barrel project, an army bureaucracy protecting its program from legitimate questions, a vehicle built by committee for a war that would never be fought. Then Iraq happened. Operation Desert Storm in January and February 1991 gave the Bradley its first major combat test. The results were not what the critics had predicted. U.S. Army Bradley units operating in the ground campaign across Kuwait and southern Iraq destroyed more Iraqi armored vehicles than the M1 Abrams main battle tank units operating alongside them. The final count was 280 Iraqi armored vehicles destroyed by Bradley crews, compared to 136 confirmed kills attributed to Abrams tanks during the same operation. The Bradley's 25mm gun proved lethal against Soviet-supplied BMP-1 and BMP-2 infantry fighting vehicles. The thermal imaging allowed Bradley crews to identify and engage Iraqi vehicles in darkness and smoke that Iraqi crews could not penetrate with their older optics. The TOW missile system was used against heavier targets at ranges that Iraqi crews had not anticipated. The colonel who had testified against the Bradley in 1981 was still alive. No record survives of his public response to the Gulf War data. What the Gulf War also revealed was the Bradley's vulnerability. 2 Bradleys were destroyed by Iraqi fire during the ground campaign. 4 were destroyed by American forces in friendly fire incidents. The incidents highlighted the vehicle's visual similarity to Soviet vehicles at night and in poor visibility, a problem that U.S. Army planners had known about and had not adequately solved. The vehicle was vulnerable. It was also lethal. Those 2 facts existed simultaneously, and neither cancelled the other. Afghanistan from 2001 onward proved a different kind of test. The Bradley was not optimized for counterinsurgency operations. Its size made it unsuitable for many of the narrow streets and restricted terrain of Afghan villages. But in the open terrain of Kandahar and Helmand provinces, the combination of 25mm cannon and TOW missiles provided firepower that no other vehicle in the American inventory could match at the same weight class. Bradley crews in Afghanistan engaged Taliban positions at ranges where Taliban RPGs and heavy machine guns could not respond effectively. The vehicle's thermal imaging tracked fighters moving at night across terrain that provided no cover from sensors while providing apparent cover from visible observation. The Bradley accumulated a combat record in Afghanistan that reinforced what the Gulf War had established. The vehicle that Congress had investigated as a death trap was surviving in environments that killed lighter vehicles and providing firepower that heavier vehicles could not deploy in the same terrain. Then came the decision that would prove the Bradley's worth a final time. In January 2023, the United States announced the delivery of M2 Bradley fighting vehicles to Ukraine. The first Ukrainian crews trained on the Bradley in Germany. The training was compressed. Ukrainian tankers and vehicle crews had operated Soviet equipment for decades. The Bradley's sophistication required adjustment, but Ukrainian crews adapted quickly. By the spring offensive of 2023, Ukrainian Bradleys were operating across the Eastern Front. The results matched and in some cases exceeded the Gulf War data. Ukrainian Bradley crews destroyed Russian T-72 and T-80 tanks using TOW missiles in engagements that Russian tank commanders had not planned for. The 25mm cannon destroyed Russian BMP-3 and BTR-82A infantry carriers that Russian planners had fielded as the Bradley's equivalent. The thermal imaging allowed Ukrainian crews to engage Russian positions at night when Russian vehicles could not effectively target the Bradleys. In one documented engagement north of Avdiivka in November 2023, a single Bradley crew destroyed 3 Russian vehicles in 11 minutes while absorbing 2 RPG hits that damaged but did not penetrate the hull. The crew survived. The vehicle kept fighting. 40 years after a U.S. Army colonel called it a death trap in front of Congress, the M2 Bradley fighting vehicle was doing exactly what its designers had said it would do: killing enemy armor, protecting its crew, moving faster than the enemy could track it. The vehicle that had taken 13 years and $1.5 billion and 4 near cancellations to build had turned out to be worth every argument